This is the fourth screencast on air quality, and in this screencast I will describe one more type of air pollutant, and that's acid deposition. And then I will turn your attention to various ways which we can reduce the amount of air pollution through technology. So for this first topic, acid deposition, I would like to walk you through the process so that you understand it is a process, but mainly I'd like you to learn the definition and the effects on humans and the environment, rather than be required to know the process. So in acid deposition, nitrogen oxides and sulfur oxides are released into the atmosphere, and they combine with atmospheric oxygen and water. These become a secondary pollutant, two secondary pollutants. One is called nitric acid and the other is sulfuric acid. Then these secondary pollutants break down further into nitrate and sulfate, which create the acid in acid deposition. So let's take a look at the diagram. First you have the primary pollutants, the initial pollutants, sulfur dioxide, which is one sulfur atom and two oxygen atoms, and nitrogen oxides, which could be one nitrogen atom with one oxygen atom or one nitrogen atom with two oxygen atoms. They combine with oxygen and water in the atmosphere, and as a result, sulfuric acid and nitric acid are produced. Then those are considered secondary pollutants because they're not emitted directly from a source. It's the result of a combination of primary pollutants with other molecules in the atmosphere. And then sulfuric acid and nitric acid break apart into two hydrogen atoms positively charged and a sulfate atom which is negatively charged. And in the case of nitric acid, a hydrogen atom positively charged and a nitrate molecule negatively charged. And these are also secondary pollutants because they were formed only after reactions. They were not from a primary source. And these components are what make up acid precipitation. You probably have heard the term more of acid rain, but it can form different types of precipitation. It could be acid rain. It could be acids in snow, which then when the snow melts, it's sort of like the same thing as acid rain. And there's even dry acid precipitation. So here again are the more important aspects for you to learn, and that is the effect of acid deposition. First, it lowers the pH of water bodies, and this is very problematic to many species, but in particular to fish. Fish prefer a very narrow range of pH. So if the pH is lowered as a result of adding acid, then these fish may not survive. Secondly, it decreases the species diversity in aquatic ecosystems. Aquatic meaning watery ecosystems. So that's because only certain species can live in a variety of pHs, others cannot. Not just fish, but here we're talking about all types of species in a particular aquatic ecosystem. And so then those that cannot survive more acidic water will not survive. Third, acid deposition mobilizes metals that are naturally found in soils, but then they are released into surface waters. Particularly aluminum and mercury, which might be present naturally in soil, is then mobilized into surface waters, and these particular metals harm many species and don't allow them to survive. Last, acid deposition damages things like statues that might be made of marble, monuments, buildings that might be made of limestone, for example, in other structures, even your car finish, for example. So the bottom line here is that the effects of acid deposition are mainly on organisms, not directly negatively impacting human health, but it will harm some of our human-built structures. So that was it for acid deposition. Now I would like to move on to ways to reduce air pollution. And there are three major ways: prevention, technology, and innovation. Now these slides are going to look mainly at prevention through technology. But before we get into those, do remember that there are other forms of prevention. In other words, not producing the air pollutant in the first place. So if we used fuel that had fewer impurities, so if we had a coal burning plant that had less sulfur in the coal, then we would produce less air pollution in the first place. Also, if we increase efficiency of some of our industrial processes, we can prevent more pollutants from entering the atmosphere or being produced in the first place. In addition to efficiency, there's also increased conservation. If we can use less fuel, then there will be less pollutants. And last but not least, if we use alternative energy sources that don't produce air pollutants, for example, wind energy, then again we reduce the amount of air pollutants entering the atmosphere. So now we're going to look at prevention through technology and innovation. So the first point here, we'll take each one of these one at a time, is to remove sulfur dioxide from coal by fluidized bed combustion. So that sounds very fancy, but in fact, all that happens is that coal that contains a lot of sulfur is combusted next to calcium carbonate, very near it. And calcium carbonate is a substance which happens to absorb sulfur. And then, when it does, it produces a byproduct as a result. And interestingly enough, that byproduct creates sheetrock. Sheetrock is a material that is used in interiors to buildings and homes to make up our walls. So there's a double good from this, removing the sulfur before it can reach the atmosphere and producing a useful product. A second technology which has reduced air pollution are catalytic converters on cars. So catalytic converters are specialized attachments to a vehicle. They're generally made of metals such as platinum and palladium, so they are rare. So you do want to keep that in mind. But they've greatly reduced the amount of pollution that enters the atmosphere from the burning of gasoline. In the United States, we have very strict regulations on the amount that our cars can release, and our trucks, though there's been some back legislation on that. So cars actually in the United States, I learned this the other day when my car did not pass inspection. Cars have more than one catalytic converter. Turns out my car had 4, and one of them had failed. So anyway, we have a lot of technology that is effective, and there's less of this technology in use in some countries, such as European countries. So they may get higher gas mileage than we are, but there is another aspect to it, and that's the dirtier air getting through. Okay, so we have 3 more types of ways of preventing air pollutants to reaching the atmosphere, particularly in industry. And those are scrubbers, baghouse filters, and electrostatic precipitators. So the scrubbers and smokestacks are on a second slide, so let's move down now to baghouse filters. So a baghouse filter is a filter which traps particles and lets air particles particles of pollutants, but then lets air particles or air molecules rather that are not polluted to pass through. So picture a coffee filter. It holds back the ground coffee, which is a larger particle size, but allows water to flow through because that's a smaller molecule size. Well, it's kind of similar to that. Dirty air is sent into this unit, and then it goes through it enters these series of filters that are almost like a vacuum cleaner bag, if you will. They have the larger particles, the air pollutants, stay within the filter, and the smaller clean air molecules pass through the filter, and then the clean air is outlet there. And periodically, the intake of air is stopped. There's a shaker mechanism, and those air pollutant particles are shaken to the bottom and collected. So it's not really even fancy technology, but it's very effective. The next technology is called electrostatic precipitator. So what happens here, because we're going to use electrically charged electrodes to precipitate the air pollutants from the air. So you have your intake of dirty air. There is a high voltage negative electron, which makes the air pollutant particles negatively charged. As they continue on, they pass through collection electrodes, which are positively charged. So the air pollutant particles that are now negatively charged are attracted to the positive charged electrodes. You can see denser amounts here, one more pass through to get more, a last pass through gets the rest, and then the cleaner air can exit. And then similar to the shaker mechanism over here, there's a collection hopper where these electrodes can be turned off, and then the charged particles are no longer attracted to them, so they fall to the bottom in the collection hopper. This final technology is called a scrubber. And in a scrubber, the dirty air enters the unit and travels upward. And as it does, it is showered upon with a small water mist. And the pollutant particles are attracted to the water mist. And therefore, as the water rains down, it comes down here, and it carries those air pollutants with it. And then that dirty water moves to another system, which is called a sludge removal system. And there, some of the sludge is allowed to float down to the bottom through gravity, and that's moved to disposal. And then the cleaner water up here can be recycled back to the unit for reuse. And again, as it's scrubbed and the air passes through, the cleaner air then can exit. Okay, so one thing that I do want to mention before wrapping this section up is that there's a difference between clean and cleaner. So let me go back a step. When we talked about prevention, one thing that you might hear on TV and on ads are clean coal. That's coal that naturally has less sulfur mixed in it. And it's not necessarily clean, it's just cleaner. And the same with some of these some of these technologies. They may clean a vast majority of the air pollutants, but it's not necessarily removing every air pollutant. So some will still be released into the atmosphere. Okay, so that's a wrap for this one, and then I'll go on to stratospheric ozone next.